Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Joe Davidge. I'm the Executive Director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. And on behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book, the Decatur Arts Alliance, DeKalb County Public Library, and the DeKalb Library Foundation, welcome to the second in our series of Artist Talks for Book is Art 10 Transformation. A few things before we begin our presentation this evening. If you would like to ask a question of any of the artists tonight, feel free to do so by typing the question into the chat feature or by using the Q&A feature. You can find the Q&A button at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your device. You can click on it and then type in your question there, and we will make sure to answer it in turn. We'll also be monitoring their chat just in case you can't use the Q&A feature and you need to type it there. We've also enabled the live transcription for our hearing impaired patrons. You can find the CC button at the top or the bottom of your screen, and by clicking on it, you can enlarge the font to make it more legible for you to read. Once again, we would like to thank the Decatur Arts Alliance for hosting the Book as Art exhibition at the Decatur Library. If you haven't seen the show and you would like to do so, you can find the gallery hours available in the chat where you can register for an appointment. If the gallery hours don't work for you and you need to find a special time to come and see the show, do feel free to email us and we'll try to work that out with you as well. I would also like to mention that many of the pieces of art in the show are available for purchase, and you can find that by looking at the catalog and then contacting the Decatur Arts Alliance. Not only do you support the artists, but a portion of the proceeds does go back to the Decatur Arts Alliance to help continue this wonderful exhibition. Right now, I'd like to go ahead and give the bios for our artists this evening. They will then, of course, talk a little bit about their work in turn. Sarah Bryant has produced artist books in print under the name Big Jump Press since 2005. These books use analytical imagery and reference material to address topics ranging from archives and self-representation to population mapping and urban planning. She frequently collaborates with artists and individuals working in other fields. Her work can be found in dozens of libraries and private collections in the United States and abroad, including the Library of Congress, the New York Public Library, and the Yale Arts Library. She's currently an assistant professor at the University of Alabama, where she teaches letterpress and other courses for the Masters in the Fine Arts of Book Arts program. To see more about her work, view her portfolio at bigjumpress.com. Daniel Martin is a multidisciplinary designer and professor of graphic design at the University of Wisconsin, Parkside. Dan received his master's in the fine arts and design from the University of Minnesota. His creative and research interests include graphic design, editorial design, and the design of scholarship, digital humanities, and creativity studies. In his design practice, he has worked for clients including the University of Chicago Press, the Center for Study of Ethics and in the Professions at Illinois Institute of Technology, Centro de Trabajadores Unidos en la Lucha, the United States Soccer Federation, and the Goldstein Museum of Design. Dan lives in Kenosha, Wisconsin, with his wife and dog. Roger Peet is an artist, printmaker, muralist living in Portland, Oregon. His work tends to focus on civilized bad ideas, predator-prey relationships, and the contemporary crises of biodiversity and capitalism, and what can and can't be done about them. He coordinates the National Endangered Species Mural Project and helps to run the cooperative Flight 64 print studio in Portland. He collaborates with artists, activists, and scientists globally and locally in the service of a more generous and wilder world. Denise Stephenson is currently transforming herself from academic to artist. For over 30 years, Per has run a writing center in higher education while also being a published writer of many genres, including poetry and novel. For 25 years, Per has been dabbing in the book arts. While her profession took much her creativity, there was an extra Per wanted to think of images rather than words, often creating blank journals. Through the academic and in preparation for retirement, Per spent more time finding ways to incorporate Per's own words into book arts. Per piece in the show, I Was Taught to Be White, provides 3 very short biographical stories successfully starting to bridge this gap. Blending words, images, and structures brings joy, even as Per considers challenging topics like racism. We're so very pleased to have all of these artists here this evening, and we hope that you engage in conversation with them after each of their presentations. Right now, we'd like to begin with Sarah Bryant. Sarah?
Hello, thank you so much for the invitation to talk. I'm really thrilled to be part of the exhibition. I am going to right now start a timer because I don't want to go over. So forgive me, I'm going to talk and there's going to be a very weird alarm that goes off in the middle of it, but at least you know I'm not going to, suck up more of your time than necessary. I'm going to share my screen, which hopefully will not be challenging. And I hope that this is something that you can now see. I'm going to operate on faith now. I'm fortunate enough to have a few pieces in the show, which I'm very happy about. And I wanted to talk specifically about one of them, which is this project called Multiple Discovery, produced by myself in collaboration with a group of artists that I've been working with since 2013. We call ourselves Shift Lab Collective. And since we founded this kind of collaborative endeavor, we've made a number of kind of large scale artist books and printing performance activities. And we've done a lot of stuff together in the last almost 10 years. So this is our most recent project. So I'll just introduce it a little bit, talk about the design of the project, and then show you hopefully a video which may or may not work, of one of these projects. So multiple discovery, I'm just going to read this quick. Multiple discovery occurs when innovations are made independently and simultaneously in different locations. In this project, Shift Lab Collective uses multiple discovery as a metaphor for our own remote collaborative practice. Working with a common horizon line and color palette, we each developed imagery for this artist book in separate studios. Printed sheets were then exchanged in batches of 10. Individually, we wrote and printed text gathered from a shared collection of source material related to the idea of multiple discovery, which is sometimes called simultaneous invention, and collated and folded our sheets into a unique set of 10 copies. The resulting edition of 50 is made up of 5 variations of 10 copies each. So what you see on the left side of your screen are the title pages of 3 of the 5 variations. So each of those 3 was produced in an edition of 10. So the whole project is 50 copies. Shift Lab, we've worked in a lot of different ways before. We've kind of made books that kind of come together as a set. We've made a mapping project where we each made a map and a sound piece and all kinds of different things. And this is the first time we've really tried to make kind of a book where we're all printing and gathering the same material together. You can see another image here. On the left are 3 different iterations of the book. I think that the image on the right is one of these 3. It would be nice if I had examples of all 5 different variations, but I don't have those images all together right now. But you can see some of the same imagery appearing and peeking through in different ways in the different projects. We initially planned on creating this project so that it would have a staggered foredge, so that the foredge would kind of give us this opportunity to show that horizon line carrying through the project. And the text, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is unique to each variation, but we're all drawing from the same sources. And this project started in 2019, and we originally envisioned that we would go to our studios, print all of this work, and then gather at events, at 5 different events over the course of the next year or so, and bind these variations together as kind of performances and community engagement activities. But of course, that all fell apart. And so in the end, we decided that instead, the 5 of us would kind of imagine or come up with our own collations in private in our studios, in our homes, where a lot of us were fortunate enough to be kind of hunkering down during the heavy part of the pandemic, which obviously we're still in. So we met in the in August of 2019 in Petaluma, one of our members, Macy Chadwick, runs a residency called In Cahoots, which is such a wonderful place. If anyone is in a position to apply for a residency there, it's just a beautiful place to go. And so we gathered there in 2019 and came up with the kind of broad strokes of the project and made a mock-up together, which you can see here, where we established some of the kind of formal elements of the project. How much time do I have left? 5 minutes. Doing okay. So you can see a horizon line. We're trying to use the same color palette. In the end, as we, this was about a week that we spent together, throwing around ideas and eventually, coming up with some more concrete parameters with which we could move forward. But when we left, we were able to really solidify some of those things. So the things that we knew we needed to bind the project together in a way that wouldn't make it seem like a kind of mishmash of past sheets and I don't know what all, was to use the same ink. So we identified which colors we could all use. Some of us are letterpress printers, some of us are printing risograph, so we found some colors that we knew could be consistent, and then we ordered the ink and divided it between us. We also decided where that horizon line would be so that it would be consistent throughout the edition, and we decided how many sheets we would all be printing front and back. We have a Google Doc for all of our projects, or I should say like a million Google Docs that no one can ever find at the time when they need them. This is just one page out of probably 30 pages. It's like sedimentary rock, the beginning of the ideas at the bottom, and then all the other stuff kind of comes to the top. But you can see after that first meeting, we had some basic ideas about what we knew we wanted to do. The common horizon line, the color palette, the idea that we would be printing double-sided with one kind of feeling on one side and one on the other. And then months later, like months and months later, we were gathering text from sources that we felt were appropriate to the project. So this is a list of final sources that we used, and we were pulling from them, but not using any of them in a way that they would be immediately identifiable. But we listed them in the colophon so that, of course, people could identify where the text had come from. So I'm going to press play. I'm really hopeful that this is going to work. And while this is running, and this is going to show a couple of different variations of the project, I'm going to read the text that I use for my component of the project. The other variations, the text is very similar. Some of these phrases and sentences and bits and pieces kind of echo throughout the different iterations of the book. The world is a place of objects. An iron plate, a map, a medal, a dish, a musical instrument. Work with the tools you are given. It is an incremental process. Start from the sun where the process begins. Now replace rollers with coarse wire teeth. The curves will follow one another. A rotating paddle wheel, coiling wire, a particular species of bamboo, scarce and closely guarded information. Our being is being in time, in chronological order. A herd, a group, another encounter. We shall farther on meet again and again. We shall convert signals to sounds, ledgers of shapes, longevity, brightness, position, areas of convergence, thatchwork, weaponry, buttons, lace, faces turned towards the earth, told to keep time that is no longer solar, seeing in several directions at once, the slow motion of parades passing and things rising, a transformation, an action condensed into a horizon, the ability to understand something before it's observed. Swim out from the center in the direction of the current. We shall farther on meet again and again. So here's the second variation coming up now. This is Denise Stephenson. And we tried to find ways of making the design of the project consistent. We're using the same paper. We're using a binding structure that's kind of modular. We ordered spine pieces that were that have holes drilled in them in the same positions so that we could use the same materials, but perhaps alter how many sections we were going to be including in the editions or how that sewing was going to work. And I hope that as you're watching, you can see that some of these folios are, appearing and reappearing in different orientations. And in the end, this wasn't intended to be a COVID project. I mean, no one's project was intended to be a COVID project when they began. But something about the way that the process of production had to shift meant that it became this project that we were producing in collaboration, in separate spaces, using the same material, talking about shared experience. And it was, I think, a really meaningful project for all of us at that time. I have 1 second. I am out of time. I'm going to stop. I'm going to move this forward if I can. And I just want to say you can find us as a group at shiftlab.org. And the other participants or the other members of the group, who I should have mentioned at the beginning, are Katie Baldwin, Denise Bookwalter, myself, Macy Chadwick, and Tricia Tracy. So I'll stop sharing. Thanks very much.
Thank you so very much, Sarah. And next we're going to go to Daniel Martin for his presentation. Daniel?
Hello. Thanks, Sarah, first of all, and thanks everybody for having me. What a great presentation. I really enjoyed seeing that. I'm really honored to be part of this group tonight from up here in Wisconsin. I do not have quite the slideshow that Sarah had prepared, but I am going to share my screen as well. So give me 1 second here. And it looks like that's working for me now. So what you're seeing here is my piece that is involved in the show. I've titled it version 122, number 896. And I'm going to talk about this piece in sort of the abstract because it's actually part of a bigger group of pieces. There's 12 in total. I figured it was a little bit too much to enter them all in this show. So we've got the one here just tonight. I'm going to kind of speak off the cuff compared to Sarah, so please bear with me a little bit. So this came out of a job I used to have, and I should note I am not an art book maker. I'm an appreciator for sure. I look at this as more sort of my interpretation of a book, and in a broader sense, a sort of a communicative tool that exists in the world, that being a journal, specifically in this case, an academic journal. Before I went to graduate school and got my MFA, I worked in academic publishing for about 10 years. I worked for the University of Chicago Press. And while I was there, I mostly did electronic typesetting, web, some light web design, putting things online, putting our science journals online and our humanities journals online, and as well as printing or as well as producing print journals and periodicals. So when I got into graduate school and I had learned a whole lot more about graphic design and started thinking back to my working days, I found that like I was attracted to this specific publication or one specific publication. In this case, that's the publications of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. And bear with me for just a second. I forgot to hit start on my stopwatch because I don't want to go over time either. All right. So this is an edition of, or my rendition of an edition of the publications of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. What I did was I started thinking about how in our education system today, we don't really utilize print in the same way anymore. A lot of the journals and trade publications and places that we try to submit work and get published have moved entirely online. And as a result, some of the production values have dropped off. They maybe had cheaper paper for the print editions, or the print editions would just end up in the vast archives or vault of a academic library. And I thought that this was happening with PASP here. I had seen also in classrooms where instructors will just download one issue or one article of a journal rather than a whole volume. The wholeness of the volume was something I was trying to get after with this. They'll be maybe they'll be photocopied or marked up in some way. So we're, as users of these documents, we're altering them permanently in sharing them with other people. I thought a lot about the way the internet works today with sharing documents from places like JSTOR and other repositories. And that's definitely been in the news, at least in academic circles, over the past several years. So what I did was I I chose this journal because it had a lot of images in it. Astronomy and Astrophysics has quite a lot of, where I think we're all familiar with very beautiful images of galaxies, stars, nebulae, that sort of thing. But more than that, in their publications, what you see is a lot of charts, a lot of scatter plots, a lot of graphs and other sort of less interesting images. I knew something about the production of this journal too, because I had worked for them. I knew that when authors would write their papers up, they want to get them published as soon as possible, no delay or minimal delay. And so the publication practices of the journal sort of mirrored that quick publishing, quick, be the first, speed at all costs kind of environment. Very different than some of the art books that we've seen already tonight, and I'm sure some of the ones we're yet to see. So I knew that when it came to doing page layouts of this journal, the people in charge of it had written computer programs, algorithms really, that would squeeze as much content onto as few pages as necessary in order to maximize efficiency, basically, and how fast they could publish. So I remembered this. I remember that there was really not a human touch when it came to the typesetting. It really just went into a big black box and squirted out the other side as a PDF. So I knew that if I was to look at this, I think any exploration I did would have to concentrate on the way that humans have kind of been taken out of this process. And so I started looking at the pages. All of these journals are available as PDFs from, well, I think these are actually free to anyone now. They've passed their embargo phase where you'd have to pay to access them. So anyone could go to this particular journal's website and download as many issues as you want, going up into about 2 years ago. So I downloaded the first volume after I started working at the University of Chicago Press. That was my starting point. And I methodically went through each page of each issue and isolated all the imagery. All the text was removed through Adobe Photoshop Magic and Illustrator, and I was left with just boxes where the images had been. I took the images out themselves because I was more interested in the page layouts that were algorithmic than the actual images on the page. In a way, I was looking for how the robot or the computer program that set the pages up would make choices about where to put images on the page. Since there was no human involved anymore, things like grids and I don't know, just any other typical sort of setup of a modern typesetting operation or someone who's doing more artistic page layouts goes right out the door. All the images are also produced by scientists. And so there isn't really a lot of standardization between them. Some will show up as gridded small images. Some will show up as single images that are then gridded by the algorithm. Some show up as single images that stand alone on a page. And where they land on the page isn't really regular. I'm going to move over here and use my pointer. Hope you can see it. You end up having sort of, it's a 2-column design. So there's always sort of this gouge or trench down the middle. And I should also say when I finished removing all the text and was left with only image placements, I used a system to typify those. So I colored them with on the computer. The blue squares are representative of charts, graphs, and plots. Red squares were photographs, raster images, and screenshots. And yellow squares, rectangles too, were drawings, flowcharts, and schematics. So I had these sort of types of images that they used. I put them into categories. And then when I colored them, I also manipulated the images into, well, making them somewhat transparent, giving them outlines so you could see where they landed on a page, and allowing them to interact through some filters to show interactions of color between layers. And this is one of the resulting images. What I think of it as sort of a colored X-ray of one edition of the journal. So you're seeing every image that is in there, where they land on the page, what type they are, and the different colors and line and shapes that you find are because of interactions between the pages. I would guess that, I don't know the exact page count for this edition, I would say at least 120 pages, maybe 130 or 40. So you're seeing all those images kind of at once. Over here on the lower left, I use PASP as kind of a caption. So I was thinking of this as making my own scientific images. PASP is the acronym for Publications of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. This more central column with letters and numbers, this is the count of charts, graphs, and plots. So there are 74 charts, graphs, and plots, 27 photographs, raster images, and screenshots, and 6 drawings, flowcharts, and schematics. And all those are visible in their placement, their layout at once. And finally on the right, this is version 122, number 896. It was published in October, coincidentally, of 2010. And that was my first year working at the press. I want to just show real quick, I have my my personal website up here in another tab. I said there are several other, or there are 11 other prints in this edition. So if you're interested in seeing the rest, you can go to danmartin.net. And in my portfolio under this poster series called Layout Deconstruction, you can see some of the rest. So I have some close-up photos. I should also note this was a pandemic project. I finished my MFA studies in spring of 2020. So I did my thesis defense on Zoom, and I never saw my advisor again. So what I've done here is hung one of the posters outside, which was the only place I could get any decent light at that time. We couldn't go into studios, we couldn't go into buildings. And then I have smaller digital images below of all the other 11 posters. You're also welcome to right click on these, open them in a new tab, and then you can get really up close and personal. They're very, very high quality JPEGs. And I think by my stopwatch, I'm starting to run out of time. So I'm gonna go back to my original here. I'm really happy to have presented to you tonight. I'm looking forward to the other presentations and any questions that you might have. So I'm gonna turn my stopwatch off, stop sharing, turn back it over to Joe.
Thank you so much, Dan. And it was actually great to see all of the other images in that series as well, because it is a very, very striking poster that we have hanging up in the exhibition. You can't miss it when you see it. Right now, we'd like to turn it over to Roger Peet for his portion of the presentation. Roger?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Joe, and thanks to everybody else for being part of this and for the opportunity to be included in this online presentation and this show. So my piece is called 7 Elemental Forces, and it's an artist book made for the letterpress. I'm going to start sharing the screen here, and I'm also going to start a timer like everybody else, which was a great idea. So sharing the screen. There we go. So this book is it's all a series of lino cuts printed on a letterpress, and I made this during the sort of early part of the pandemic. And I live in Portland, Oregon. And I made this during in the aftermath of the time frame when we were really socked in with wildfire smoke, which was during the pandemic and during the series of uprisings that were happening here in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. And the city was in a deep gray cloud for months because of all these very large wildfires burning in the national forest to the south and east of the city. And so the idea for this book is sort of came out of that experience, that time frame. And what I sort of envisioned this book as is it's like a field guide to the future. It's like an artifact from the future that depicts these 7 forces from the natural world that people in the future are going to have to be more familiar with and deal with on a daily basis. So this is just sort of a fanciful imagination of what that might look like. So that's the cover. This is the back cover. And it has these, well, I'll go into the text, but this is a quote. I forget exactly who this quote is from, but I have a copy of the book here. Oh, it's right. A person from Nebraska Emergency Management. Referring to, I think, a tornado. So the book opens with a series of like a small essay that I carved in linoleum. And this is just like basically like an introduction to the subject matter of the book. And continuing on from that, there's the sort of contents title page. This whole book is printed on this like nice heavy paper, and it's bound in an accordion format, which is a sort of one common way of binding artist books, where you just have peak and valley and peak and valley and peak and valley. It's not bound to a spine, and you can open it up like an accordion and extend it like for its entire length. So the book is basically composed of these 7 forces that I've sort of arbitrarily designated the ones that are important that I'm going to work on, and each of them is depicted with a 4-color reduction linocut and a piece of text that is a quote from a scientist or a politician or somebody affected by the experience of one of these elemental forces in their life, in their experience. So the first one is fire, and this is on the right. You see the this 4-color reduction linocut, and a reduction linocut is where you instead of making a print out of several different blocks, you instead make it out of the same block, where you carve more of the image away each time you print to get, so you're layering up less and less actual printing area with different colors as you progress through the layers, and that'll be easier to see in some of the other prints. Then I tried to give each of these subjects its own sort of color palette. So this next one is smoke, which was a real, it was a very vivid and sort of intimate experience that everybody in Portland had with the smoke, which was, made the city sort of difficult to navigate around, made the sun very sort of ominous orange at all hours of the day. And, and acted also as a metaphor for what was going on in the streets, where there were big clouds of tear gas every night from the general conflict downtown, only really in downtown, not in much else of the city, between people and the police. So in this one, you can sort of see in the image on the right, you can see the progressive layers of increasingly darker ink that are made after like printing like a very light blue, carving away some more linoleum, printing a slightly darker blue, doing the same thing again, and then on through the next few layers. So, and this is the third image, which is wind. And each of these images has on the left the small quote from some politician, and it relates, in a different way to each of these phenomena. Like this, and this is from this is from the National Hurricane Center, describing the rate of increase of the, just dangerous, catastrophic storms over the last few years, or the last year. The next one here is wave, with a quote from, let's see, I can't remember which one this is from. I think this is from NASA. This is Benjamin Cook from NASA Climate, with this quote on the left here. And continuing on through that is, this is the next one, which is flood. This is a quote from Kim Reynolds, the governor of Iowa, looking out across the extent of the flood and just seeing the top of the grain bins poking out of it. The next one is drought. And this is something that we also are experiencing very, very much in the West here where I live. And this is a quote from, I think this is, I can't remember. I think this is the, well, I don't know which one of these it is. I don't have the right information in front of me, but you can see that I've sort of tried to depict like this sort of desiccation of, of the ground with like a couple little bones in here. And this last one, of course, is, one of the other 7 elemental forces that the final one that we're going to have to deal with in the future, which is disease. And, this quote on the left here sort of, I feel like sums up to a degree, a lot of what is going on with the rest of the subject matter in this book. And that's the loss of biodiversity plays a role in the emergence of new diseases. And this is all about what we're doing to nature, not about what nature is doing to us. And yeah, that's a quote from Felicia Keesing, who is a professor at Bard College. And then at the end of the book, there is a series of credits for the people who are quoted in the book. And that is pretty much all of it. So I am going to stop sharing and just show you, I have here with me a few of the actual blocks that are left over from carving, which I thought might be vaguely interesting to see in this context. So these are the linoleum pieces that I've printed to make these, and you can see that there's hardly any surface area left to print on after it being carved away repeatedly. This is all that's left of the fire image. It's just that last orange layer. And, you know, just another example is here's all that's left of that wave image. It's the last dark layer that's a shadow on top of the rest of it. Let me just check my time allotment. I still have a couple minutes. Yeah, so this was making this book was it was an interesting process to try to imagine the you know, like a character from the future sort of having this book that they refer to. And the, you know, the introductory passage to it, like talks about, you know, that this book is imagined as a tool to help somebody identify these forces that are now much more present in the landscape than they used to be. There's something that we may have been able to ignore at previous points in our personal history or in the history of our societies, but now increasingly we have to figure out how we are going to relate to them and how we will, you know, try to relate to them in the future, such as it is. So, you know, I'm just going to read a little bit of that introductory passage as a way to, like, wrapping this up. So this book is a tool to help you identify them and contains pictures of their shapes as well as the words that people have said when describing them. And we say these words aloud now when the forces surround us in hopes that we will recognize each other's voices. We say them while shielding our faces from the heat, coughing into our collars, hiding in the basement, clinging to flotsam, floating at the horizon, blowing the dust from our tables, and waiting in the hospital by candlelight. We honor them, the forces. They deserve it. And I think that is good enough for me. I will leave you with, if you want to see more of my work and read some more of what I've written about this book, you can find my website at justseeds.org. I'm a member of this artist cooperative called Just Seeds, and that's you look for my name on that website and you will find my stuff. And thanks again for the opportunity to be a part of this. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you so very much, Roger. Before, of course, we bring Denise on to close out the presentations this evening, I do want to remind you all that be thinking of some questions to ask our artists tonight. And don't forget, you can type those into the chat, or you can type those into the Q&A section, and that way we'll be sure to answer them in turn. But right now, I'd like to turn it over to Denise.
Thanks, Joe. I also am going to share screen and tell a story. I'm going to show you sort of a bit of my journey as a book artist. And okay, so I live in Oceanside, California currently, and the books that I've made over the last 20 plus years, I'm going to show you some of those, and along the way describe sort of the dance that I've been doing between structure and language. So as an artist, I've always been more sculptural, but I'm trained as an academic. My PhD is in American Studies. So when I'm being an artist, I love color, I love texture, and I always love a good engineering challenge. But as a professional, I ran college writing centers for nearly 30 years in New Mexico, Michigan, and California, and wrote many academic articles and chapters and such, along with one dystopian novel called Isolation. And I published that in 2014, so though it rings of the pandemic that we're currently in, this was all imagined before that. So earning my living through words meant that when I was making art books, I often wanted to avoid language. And I really exhausted my creative word brain at work, so I needed a visual escape. So my book that's in this exhibit, I Was Taught to Be White, with I-E-Y-E, demonstrates where I currently am, learning to balance my words and forms. And I'm going to come back to this book actually at the end of what I'm going to show you today. So here's a few of my blank books. Coptic journals, and boxes. You'll note a recurring theme of triangles in my work. The Coptic journals were Kickstarter rewards, while these triangle creations were built in one of Ginger Burrell's classes. I don't think that I have ever filled a blank book that I made in a class with content, because for me, content and form really evolve together. As you can see in Mining a Vein here, which grew from my appreciation for the Sumi Nagashi and the marbled papers that I used to build Mining a Vein. You'll also start to note that I love boxes and I love folded structures. For a while, a friend and I made female figures out of all kinds of materials. And on the left, you can see how I incorporated a tiny book for each woman and then a poem at the bottom of the piece when I turned this in for a San Diego Book Arts show called Cherchez la Femme, or Look for the Woman. Sprite on the right was actually my first gallery sale. So thanks, Sprite. When I finally had the opportunity to learn how to use a letterpress, I needed words. This was at Penland School of Craft, and though I needed words, I needed very few. So even with very few, it took me days to figure out how to create 3 unique structures for this triangle book. What she said. One signature, seen here, has pronouns circling around the word triangulation on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, various things that the act of triangulation leads to. The second signature has a vignette of what she said not being understood by he. And the third gives definitions of triangulations in various disciplines. It turns out that triangulation happens in many places. I thought it was psychological. So this book, I'm quite pleased, is held in several library special collections, including Yale. Just before the pandemic, I created Tristrangulation for a San Diego Book Arts show titled Louder Than Words. As you can likely tell by now, calls for shows function to focus me on a theme and lead me to create new books. In the first iteration of this book, I made the fatal mistake that binders should never do, which was I didn't pay attention to the grain. And the black and white paper were actually mixed directions. And when I glued them, it meant that during the first show that this was in, it started curling. So by the time I got it back, I had to remake the entire book, which I did lovingly, and lesson ingrained. Sorry, I do like puns. Here, this image from above, you can see the structure. It's 3 accordion pages with covers attached with bamboo skewers as hinges. Here you can see nestled into the folds the simple cut designs of women that I used and some of the red stitching. Each page contains a brief poem, which I hope has a visceral quality, a cut image with a large word in the background spelling out over the 3 pages, "Hear my voice," and a statistic about the type of life depicted. So in this book, it's tristrangulation, homelessness, abuse, and old age. This piece has been in numerous US shows. But those last 2 books give the sense that adding words started to come easily for me, and that hasn't really been true until very recently. So when I learned the caterpillar binding stitch, which is on a blank book, nothing inside, I imagined other possibilities for the caterpillar and ultimately created this sculptural piece, which is roughly a 6-inch cube, calling on my fiction writer with all of these flowers. I had to title it The Plot Thickens. Both caterpillar creations came during the pandemic, as did the remaining work that I'll show you tonight. So for a traveling book project, which created groups of 6 artists, we were all making pages for one another's books, I designed this unique structure. In part, I did this because structure is my strength, but also because I was very fearful of being involved in this project because I feel I lack 2D skill. So each differently sized and shaped page reveals some of the page behind it. You can see a bit of that here on the cover, or you can see it a bit better here from above. I admit that the challenge of this particular project to create a page for someone else's theme and specifications roughly every 10 days definitely increased my range of material usage, and it increased my confidence, which was a nice gift. I took Helen Hebert's Weave Through Winter class in February of 21 and 22. It was good pandemic timing. It allowed me to enjoy paper color and texture, but in making this sampler, I also delicately wove the colophon on the right, which allowed me to tell the story. And I was very pleased with the precision and readability that I was able to achieve with the text. That was a great accomplishment for me. Colophons have definitely become one of the ways that I am weaving my voice into my book arts. For me, sheltering in place actually encouraged me to work in my studio every day and allowed me to ease toward retirement by incorporating more words into my books, like this book, COVID Times, a gatefold book. I began with time cliches, and those ended up being the right-hand pages after I discovered that a when statement on the left allowed people to mix and match the phrases as they liked. So you can independently turn these pages on right and left. I also shared this piece with my writing group as I was generating it and enlisted their help to create a list of when statements. This book is also in several special collections. I'll read this one on here. The left, the when statement came from my writing group. When stripping in front of a computer is instigated by your doctor, and I've chosen to put it next to, it's the time of your life. Okay. Similarly, this accordion book allowed me to explore in words various musings, again, about the pandemic, that all begin with if I on the left page, and then on the right page begin with, or will I? Using varied geometric shapes and lines as the background added complication, both to the thinking of things through, as well as trying to read it in the text. So I allowed myself to follow those lines and play with them a bit. So this one is, if I keep drawing lines until the paper is no longer visible, will I be finished sheltering in place? Or will I need new colors for this previously unimagined background? Having recently been to the street art meccas of Melbourne, Australia and Dunedin, New Zealand, during the pandemic, I also created a simple pocket accordion, which holds cards, each bearing an image of street art on one side, and on the other side, both location details and a small poem that I composed to go with the image. I was actually so enamored of this marriage of word and image that I wanted to share it with family and friends. So I also created a zine with the title On the Streets Down Under. And I made a symbolic 20 of those in 2020 and mailed them out for a bit of artistic cheer to my friends. Okay, so that brings us back to the book that's in this exhibit. A call from Focus on Book Arts, which in book arts we affectionately call FOBA, for pieces depicting where we live, led me to create I Was Taught to Be White. I had been engaged in numerous race workshops as both participant and as organizer, and this felt the most honest exploration of where I was living at the time, inside my white skin. The outside of the box for this book provides varied ways of thinking of whiteness. So one side is just plain white. Here are the other two sides, one with the words pretty, pretty white, and one with the words white privilege, white complicity, white supremacy. The inside depicts how complicated race and ethnicity really are, with varied colors of paper and handmade stampings. The triangle book has 3 signatures, each with a vignette. 2 of these share stories of being taught and then expected to take white privilege for granted. And the third, a more contemporary story, reveals the struggle to announce racism when I experience it. And I'm going to stop sharing there and send this to Book Arts, and hopefully our assistant will paste a link to a Google Doc that actually has the words to all three of those signatures. And with that, I will close. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so very much, Denise. Wonderful presentation and very, very insightful as well. Once again, just a reminder, if you would like to ask any of the artist questions, and artists, feel free to ask each other questions as well. Don't forget to go ahead and type those into the Q&A and into the chat. If everybody would like to just go ahead and come back up on screen, we can kind of get our chat rolling for the next few minutes. I'll just start with a general question to get us moving along this evening. And, I very much enjoy how several of you are letterpress artists, or you're using book deconstruction to almost show us how things are constructed. But as artists, in your creative process, what is it that is the impetus for the start of your book creation? Is it a particular material? Is it a particular text that really inspires you to create something? And if it's, say, a material, or if you have an idea, is there anything that would confine you, price, availability, that you would either prohibit you, or that you would maybe set aside in order to convey your artistic idea?
I don't know if I want to be the first to answer that, so I'm gonna wait a second.
I can say something, just that my projects are pretty slow rolls. It takes me a long time to work out what they're going to be. And so I spend a lot of time making, and the project I was talking about was a collaborative work, which obviously has different kinds of restrictions and deadlines, and you're working with human beings, which is sometimes harder than just working with ideas. But when I'm working on my own, I spend a lot of time making and reading and discarding, and eventually kind of evolving an idea into something I can work with. And I let the idea guide the material choices to the extent that that's possible with budgets and timing and stuff.
Roger, Daniel, Denise?
I can go. I mean, I'll say that one thing that most of the work that I make is comparatively, it's pretty affordable. Like, I make a living as an artist, and most of the stuff I make is, not very expensive. And so the process of, I don't make very many things that would be appropriate to put a large price point on. But this work, because it's so many prints and so many kind of complicated multi-layered prints, is something that goes into a different realm of pricing, which is a kind of a strange location for me to negotiate. I'm not super familiar with it, but it is also an interesting process that, I'm not really super concerned about, selling a lot of these things. The point is, for me, was going through the process of making it and trying to see if I could properly articulate the ideas inside it. So that's been an interesting thing to consider.
Yeah, I would say I'm not really focused on selling these either. Although I did arrive at a price for this exhibition. For me, I feel I'm finding my voice, or finding my practice as an artist and designer. I hadn't really thought of myself that way until I decided to leave publishing and go back into school. And after I'd been in the job world for a decade at least at that point. So what I was doing here, what drove me was trying, and what continues to drive me when doing graphic design, is finding an answer to a problem that I make up, or try to tease out some things about something I've been interested in for a while. And with this, I kept thinking about all of the work and labor I had put into these journals, all of the labor that some of the typesetters that worked on them, who are located on the other side of the planet from Chicago. They're all in the Philippines and work in their nighttime while we work in the day to publish our journals, or to print them, typeset them, and set them up. So just the way that the internet and sharing of things and piracy of things and reproductions of things had touched sort of my little corner of the working world and the visual culture that kind of surrounded it. That's really what got me going here. And since I produced these, that sort of same feeling has gone into some of the other projects I've done since.
And for me, I'd say, I already described some of how I respond to calls as a main way of generating content, but also ideas. So the pandemic led me to lots of thinking here in my own home where I just needed to produce something. I've mostly produced single unique works. And so those I usually don't sell. They're close to me. And but I do try to show them if I can. And then recently I've started learning, right? Like I'm sort of entering career 2 as an artist, and I'm learning to make editions and occasionally sell those. And I'm excited when when libraries buy them, because then they're accessible, mostly I think to probably other book artists, because we go to libraries and look at the collections and those kinds of things. But they're available, right? They're out in the world, and they're, I don't know, just it's a way of sharing ideas and being with other people, even when I don't know them.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I think, throughout your presentations, we all sort of mentioned the pandemic. And while we're talking about art and craft, did any of you experience, shortages during the pandemic and have to maybe get really creative with something that you were doing, or maybe had to think in an interesting way? It's like, oh, I'm running out of this. I'm going to maybe make the book a little thinner and not use, something like that. But, did you all kind of feel that crunch as working artists and as creative individuals?
I'll jump in and say I had fun using a lot of the materials that, you buy because you find something attractive, but then you don't have a use for it. So like going through my stash and using things that I'd accumulated was a great thing. The If I Sit book ends with this concern about if I keep making art, are people going to have to keep coming to my door to deliver it? And does that put them in danger? So it sort of led me there.
It's very, very interesting. Anybody else?
I can contribute a little bit. I spent all of the fall of 2019 and spring of 2020 working on my thesis projects. This is one of them. The printing of it became an issue because all of a sudden I no longer had access to any of the studio facilities that I needed to make these things. So I shifted from perhaps screen printing or making other experimental prints to try to find a more physical way to build it, into going to a digital offset printer and having it, professionally produced. So the result, I think, doesn't suffer. It's just that was forced upon me. Some of my other projects that came later, I made most of the forms, and I had figured this project out really before everything locked down. I just hadn't produced it yet. Some of my other projects that were intended to be more installation style ended up being entirely digital, or I had to scrap them. So it threw off not so much this one, but I definitely felt the pinch of, working from my guest bedroom instead of my nice studio space.
I had a interesting situation where I had been working on a project before the onset of the pandemic about domestic space and about making a kind of sample book about like the textile and color that are in the home. And in the pandemic, all of a sudden that book seemed so dumb. Like we were all in our spaces, and I didn't know what to do. I had to take a break from it, but I also had to return to it because one of the things that happened was that I lost, I'm a university person, and I lost access to all the studio stuff that, was there. So the book, which is this one, I ended up making out of all of my home things. I was lucky enough to have access to, I have a press at home now that I managed to move during the pandemic. And so I used my own type and my own clothes and my own like thread, and just ended up making this kind of weird project that I still don't know how I feel about it, to be honest. But sometimes you just have to make with the situation that you find yourself in. I had a question, actually, if it's okay for me to ask one, and I was going to ask Roger, so I know Roger may have an answer to a different question since you haven't spoken yet, but one of the things I thought was so interesting about your project was the meticulous amount of carving that must have been required to get that text. And I can imagine, as somebody who has some experience, carving, that process is so methodical, and to be doing it during such a chaotic time, about such a chaotic time. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that kind of weird tension between this kind of slow process and this sort of chaos that you're working about.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the question. I mean, that's funny, because I was something that I was thinking about saying as a response to this question was like, oh, well, it was an interesting experience to do this project where there was a lot of hand carving of, of the text in it. And it was like the composing of what the text was going to say, and then laying it out at, in whatever, in my personal, lino cut font. And then just going through the process of carving it. And it was a very, it's a lot of work, but it's sort of hypnotic after a while. You just get into a flow of repeating the same motions, and you know what the letter forms are, because you've repeated them over and over again after a certain period, and it becomes just becomes easier and more fluid, and a more fluid process. And there was no point at which I sort of felt that it was tedious. But it was, it was also reflecting the text, and the whole book in general is just reflecting, the experience of being in quarantine. And luckily I have this home, this is the studio that I have, it's at my house. And it has a press in it over there. So I was able to do everything in here, as it was, just sort of feeling like I was in, to some extent, like a living habitat on an alien planet, because the air outside was unbreathable, and and the news was constantly kind of unpleasant and disastrous. And I spent a lot of time that winter just in here laboriously making very small marks, and then going out in the evening to sort of see what was happening around town with various aspects of the uprising that we experienced a very powerful version of here in Portland, Oregon. So anyway.
It's very interesting, Roger. Speaking of your environment and things like that, the work that's behind you that kind of looks like the smoke piece. What is that?
It's a 4-block lino cup, and it's printed. It's layered on. It's printed on like a much larger letter than I have, and it's made with a charcoal ink. Like I made this, I went in 2021 around certain locations that had burned in the fires of 2020 and gathered some charcoal. And my partner and I have been experimenting with making inks out of natural materials to use in printmaking processes. And she's focused mostly on screen printing, and I have used this charcoal to make this make block prints like this. And some I've printed on my letterpress, and I did this workshop at a printer in town. Paul Maloney has a space where he was giving workshops, and he has a big letterpress that I was able to use to experiment with this ink, which is just pulverized charcoal from trees from a burned forest that's mixed with this substrate called number 5 plate oil. It's just this, like a base material for certain kinds of printmaking. And it's just the charcoal and the oil run through the press with these blocks that I cut out in certain shapes and then layered on top of each other.
Wow, that's really fascinating. And I'm really intrigued that, you just went out and sort of harvested this natural material to make the ink. And then what a powerful message that conveys as well, for the piece. And I think your piece in the show too, what I found very intriguing about it is, they seem to be very stark images, just done with a few colors layered on top of each other. But the wind, you get a great sense of the wind. The smoke, you get that choking sense with that voluminous smoke in it, and just seeing all 7 of those put together, I just thought it was a very intriguing and very powerful layout too.
Thank you.
That's amazing. We did have, just so artists, as we're getting to the top of the hour as well, someone requested if you are on social media. So if you don't mind sharing your social media, maybe in the chat for everyone so they can connect with you that way. But I always like to ask, sort of as we're wrapping up, not only artist talk, but our typical author talks, what are you all working on next? Are you percolating any ideas? Has there been a particular show that has a theme that you're intrigued in, Denise, that you're now working on a project? Maybe we'll start with Sarah. We'll just go alphabetical order.
I'm working on something I'm kind of excited about. It's in the beginning sort of stages, sort of, where I'm working with between 7 and 10 different collaborators to make books with each of them about the ways in which they're engaging in kind of what I'm broadly describing as acts of translation. So I'm working with a photographer and a biology professor and a translator, a woman who teaches here at Alabama who's an opera singer, a type designer, and I'm kind of looking for other people. And I'm interviewing them and we're sharing imagery, and I'm trying to make a book with each of them that is on a set of dimensions that it can then be all housed together in the end. So I finished the first one, which is Acts of Translation, Allison Grant, which is featuring this photographer who does beautiful work. And I'm designing the next two and I'm working on it and I'm excited about it. So that's my jam right now.
That's very, very fascinating. Daniel, what about you?
I'm actually doing a couple things. As said in a moment ago, at least, that, I had all these projects that got scrapped. And so now that we've moved out of deepest, darkest pandemic times and only into darkest pandemic times, I'm able to start pursuing those again. So some installation type work. I've also got a typeface that I've been slowly working on over the past year and a half or so that is getting close enough, I think, to at least put out there for people to try to use. And I've been doing some more traditional, like academic style writing about the things I've found trying to teach as an anti-racist classroom. If it wasn't clear, I lived in Minneapolis also during the George Floyd uprising. That was 2 days before I defended my thesis. And then I got on the job market and I got a job at Kenosha, or in Kenosha, Wisconsin, at UW Parkside. And Kenosha is where another but smaller uprising happened, but where some other terrible aftermath of that uprising made the news. And I'll leave discussion of it at that. So since I've been here, I've been working real hard to try to make sense of it all and help my students as much as I can make sense of it all and find their voices. And so I've been writing a little bit about that. I'm going to try to get some of that published. That's my goal.
Excellent. Thank you, Daniel. Roger?
Sure, yeah, I can maybe show you this block that I'm trying to carve right now. It's a very large block on the table. It's about 36 inches, it's about a 36-inch diameter circle, and it is the part of this body of work that I've been working on for a few years which is about, among other things, the mine in the DR Congo that produced the uranium that powered the Manhattan Project, which, if you haven't heard of this story, the mine is named Shinkolobwe, and it was the most sort of powerfully concentrated deposit of uranium that's ever been found on Earth so far. And because it was so incredibly concentrated, it made the Manhattan Project possible. But the mine itself is very sort of left out of history, and certainly the people who worked it are also very much left out of history. So this is a map that sort of traces the passage of the ore from that mine through the Manhattan Project en route to its detonation over Japan. And that also is going to involve carving an awful lot of very small text.
Fascinating. Denise, how about you?
I just retired at the end of June, and so I'm trying to. Thank you. It's a good goal. Trust me. It's nice to be here. I'm trying to figure out how to have art at the center of my world. And so currently I've been offered a couple of small teaching gigs with folding paper. So I'm prepping to do that. And I had access to a letterpress briefly. So I'm in the process of printing some of my own elegiac poetry into books that I want to make into a little box set. But otherwise, the world is my canvas, and I'm trying to figure that out, Joe. And hopefully it will just come to me.
Wonderful. I'm sure people have wished you happy retirement. It's a lovely word for some people in these times too, as well. And we had a no question, but a comment from a fellow artist out there, Lauren, who said she didn't have a question, but this is really cool. And I have to agree with her. And I think that's the perfect thing to leave on. This is really cool. Once again, everyone at home, thank you so much for allowing the Georgia Center for the Book and the Decatur Arts Alliance and our 4 artists this evening, Sarah, Daniel, Roger, Denise, to come into your homes and to share a little bit more about their artistic processes and their piece in the Book is Art show. Don't forget, once again, come see the show at the Decatur Library on the 4th floor gallery. Sign up for a time to come and see it, or let us know and we can accommodate you when non-gallery hours if we can. Thank you all so much. This was a fascinating conversation. I hope by looking at your art, we can continue that conversation, not only in the gallery, but beyond. Continue to stay safe, everyone, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.